So after graduating from Nottingham Trent University, at the time it was called Trent Poly, I graduated and just really wanted to leave the UK and start a career in fashion. And I was very lucky, very lucky, yes, successful. And then I did get fantastic jobs. It was absolutely brilliant. I love working in fashion. But as I mentioned, the Gulf War broke out, and I just met Jorge. Jorge's work as an Argentine artist is very socially engaged, politically engaged. He lived through the dictatorship in Argentina during the 70s, so from 1973 till 83 when he moved to Paris. So he'd lived through a really difficult period from when he was studying right through to the development of his career, and was really engaged socially and politically in questioning the role of art in society and how we could reach and how he could reach new audiences. So I really respected Jorge's ideology as an artist, I should say, and his practice that he was developing in the 90s in Paris. And I was beginning to feel really disillusioned with fashion. So I began collaborating with Jorge. So I know Rennie mentioned that we started collaborating in 2005, but actually you could say that we began much earlier in the early 90s when we founded Studio Orta, although each of us had practices that were, I guess, distinct because of our training and our interest, my interest in clothing and Jorge's interest in the socially engaged nature of art. But we pooled those together, and I used my skills as a designer to develop the refuge wear collection, and then body architecture, and then nexus architecture, which I can go on to show you in images in a little bit. Before I do that, I'll just mention that I'm a professor at the London College of Fashion. So that's where my role, I guess, in fashion is today, in research, and particularly in the Centre for Sustainable Fashion. And I work with a number of colleagues who are investigating various parts of the fashion industry, from the manufacturing to the design through to the distribution, etc. So there's different specialists in different areas. So, and then I'm also chair of art and the environment. So absolutely fantastic roles that I've been given at the university. And my role as chair in environment, I founded the Art for the Environment residency program. And with that, I wanted to give opportunities to the students at the University of the Arts London to go and go out into the world, go out on residencies, and to meet professionals, meet other artists, meet other designers, in a focused environment that would question our role as artists and designers and creatives today in you know, what is our role, what can we do as creatives, and in confronting that in these particular environments that the students go out to. So that was a really long response to your question, Elisa. I'll move on to the next slide. Just at the top there, I've circled monographs, and I was going to show you, yeah, this is how we do it. I was just going to show you, there's lots of monographs on our website, and you know, do go in there and have a look, and they should be all downloadable. These are resources that we've put into place so that you can do as much research as you want and download them as PDFs, etc.
Thank you for that, Lucy. So we wanted to ask, like, quite broadly, what does sustainability mean to you?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? I guess, I mean, taking it from my practice, I was particularly interested in the social role of art, in stepping off from where Jorge had created those foundations. So I was particularly interested in social sustainability and the relationships between people. I mean, I began, maybe I can run through quickly. We're going to come back to the studio afterwards. Yeah, this is where I started thinking about, as I mentioned, the crisis, the economic crisis as a result of the Gulf War, the refugee crisis. There were millions and millions of Kurdish and Iraqi refugees fleeing the war zones during that time. And I was thinking about, you know, what can be my role as a designer, as an artist, in tackling these issues of the refugee crisis and also the homeless crisis, which then was a consequence of the economic recession because of the war. So initially, sustainability was around the individual, around thinking about how to protect the individual, how the individual could survive in extreme conditions. And then I moved on to what became body architecture and thinking about the individual within community structures. So I met a very famous philosopher at the time in Paris called Paul Virilio, and he really encouraged me to think about our connections with others. That, you know, of course, so many people are homeless, are socially alone, but about how, you know, how can we reconstruct these social links? How can we bring people together? Just some examples there on the screen are the refuge wear prototypes. These are prototypes. They were things that I made in my studio in Paris at the time as a young artist. And then I went on to test them in different situations with homeless people, but also in performance situation and interventions. These are some of the interventions in the city to confront the general public, confront audiences with what was considered invisible at the time, these invisible problems of homelessness, the staging of these to draw attention and to create a debate and discussion. And then, as I mentioned, I went on to explore the collective. So here, these are the individual sculptures then joined together to create collective structures. And you can see the sleeping bags there at the top, and then the dome with the sleeping bags joining onto it. And then those structures became actually community structures. And you can see here the children in Birmingham, in Birmingham, in the name of the village. Just quickly to go on to, and then Nexus architecture, that became very emblematic of my practice. Hello?
Hello? Yeah, I think.
Just checking, my internet was unstable. Somebody tried to call me. And then later in the early 2000s, we began to think about environmental sustainability, but maybe I should come on to that a bit later so that I don't talk for too long.
Well, yeah, we were going to ask actually, so as you kind of studied fashion, how would you say that fashion and textiles have continued to influence your work since you've become an artist?
Oh yeah, greatly. I mean, it's the first passion, the first love, and I can't avoid not using textiles, any textile crafts in the work that I do. But to go back to this notion of the collective, Jorge and me, you know, I bring that to the collective. I bring my skills to the collective. And you see here, for example, this image is a Nexus architecture. The textiles is important there, but the silkscreen technique is also important. Jorge is a master of silkscreen printing. So he printed onto that. But then you can see the two Nexus architectures on the right there, one in the yellow fabric and the other with the African kanga fabric. Yeah, I mean, I loved exploring different textiles as indicators of, you know, cultural heritage, for example, and then inscribing textiles with these motifs, the text, the slogans, the pictograms, to add another layer of meaning to them. I wonder if I've got another image here. Yeah, you can see different textiles used in different locations according to context. It was really important, and when I show you around the studio a little bit later on, you can see exactly different kinds of textiles I'm working with and the techniques that I'm using. So yeah, I bring my knowledge of pattern cutting, I guess, because I love making patterns. I love making three-dimensional works, clothing or sculpture, and I bring that to our studio, to the Studio Orta, as a competence to share with the team. So I've got another image there just to show you. There's some more Nexus architecture, and yeah, that takes us back to Antarctica later on. Let's see what else have I got here.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as many of us are like here are young people who are kind of embarking on our creative journeys, what do you think, what aspect of your creative kind of educational journey has been the most significant? And have you got any like advice for people who are kind of starting that journey?
Yeah, I guess I would have never dreamt that I would become an artist, or visual artist, if you like, having studied at uni. But the skills that we learn along that journey have feed into the practice. I hope I've been able to explain that for you. So all of those technical aspects of making clothes, with that I can make sculpture. I can use those competencies to communicate with others, and those may be, you know, my team or fabricators, subcontractors. So it's, you know, this, and then the critical reflection on what you're doing as well is so important. So wherever your career, your journey takes you, the baggage of skills that you learn at university are so vital to other things that you can apply them to later on. So yeah, it's and I guess be open. Yeah, I was really open. I didn't have a fixed idea that I wanted to become an artist, but really inquisitive, and understanding that it's a research process, I think, was important for me. That through intuition initially, and then through research, learning how one project leads on to another. And I think Renia mentioned it, you know, these projects take a long time, and not being frustrated that we might not get the results that we want to at the end, but it's a long process. And I think being in contemporary art is so beneficial in that way, because we can extend the time that we do things over many years, whereas being in the fashion design industry, things had to go a lot more quickly. But then it's a question of character. So
Yeah.
if you like the fast-paced life, then fashion's for you.
And kind of coming back to what you were saying before, we know that you work with people a lot, like different organizations, and also with Jorge. And we wanted to ask, how does this collaboration benefit your artwork?
Oh, I wouldn't have been able to do anything if it wasn't for the collaborations. I mean, it's absolutely primordial. And I mean, I'm very good at, I was very good at designing clothes, but again, that's being part of a team. You know, those clothes don't go out into the world unless you're part of a big team. So I learned very early on in my career how to cooperate, how to operate with others, and I guess develop competencies as a team. And it's really important. That's the one hand. That's like, I guess, in the studio, we work together with all kinds of people. Today, my technician's not here, but I have an amazing technician that I've been working with for 30 years now. He's a 2-generation tent maker. And he retired, and now he's come to work with me in my studio, and we've built up this fantastic relationship. You know, he says, I don't want to know, you know, I don't want to know anything about your artistic project. I want to know exactly what you want to make technically, and I can do that for you. So, you know, I'm playing off his knowledge, you know, the 2 generations of making tents, and he's really happy to participate in the actual realization of the work. He didn't make any of the pieces here because I made them in the studio, but he went on to make the Antarctica tents that I'll show you in a minute, the Antarctica domes, where it's just, yeah, he's got so many skills. So, you know, I guess understanding that other people have skills that they can bring to the collective is really important. And then collectively, you know, now, you know, that was in the studio. I was going to talk about that. That's in the studio, and then outside as well, collaborating with other specialists. And that's been particularly important when working on environmental issues and understanding science of the environment, climate change, species loss, and many other subjects like that, to have that input from specialists. And then collaboration all along an artist's journey is collaborating with curators like Renee, with art galleries and museums in order to present the work to the public. You know, without these organizations and structures, it wouldn't be possible for the general public to see that, to audiences to engage with it. So the whole, you know, whole of what we do is all about collaboration all along the way. I mean, yeah. I mean, I do love being on my studio and on my own as well, but collaboration is like so important.
So Lucy, we wanted to talk to you a little bit more about refuge wear. As you said before, it was prompted by the Gulf War in the 90s, and we know that people are at the heart of your practice. So we wanted to know what prompted you to make refuge wear.
I mean, it's difficult for you as young people to imagine, but at the time, it was the first war where journalists were broadcasting live from the front line. I mean, we're also used to 24-hour news and on our phones, all the time visuals coming through on our feeds. But at the time that hadn't happened, you know, that hadn't existed, that didn't exist. So in this first Gulf War, I think 1991, 1992, it was the first time that when you switched on your television, the TV, you know, this old box, that journalists were there on the front line reporting on what was happening, and it was horrific, and it really prompted us, you know, I was with Jorge at the time, to think, well, what can we do? So, you know, seeing this mass migration that we've never seen on such a scale before, and then listening to the humanitarian appeals were first of all, for food and medication, but for clothing and shelter. And I was saying, art, clothing and shelter, you know, those are my competencies. I can combine clothing, I can combine the material, what became known as, you know, this kind of like the skin around the body, the material, the textile, in order to imagine kind of shelters, these mobile shelters, use my skills as a designer, as a pattern cutter, in order to make the refuge wear. So the habitant, the picture that you see there on the top, is the first piece that I made, literally responding to that. You know, the mobility aspect was really important. The protection aspect was really important, and the transformability aspect. So combining all of those into this, what became these sculptural prototypes. And then the fabric I chose was metaphoric. There's all kinds of, you know, other elements, underlying elements to it, but, you know, they're on this borderline between the functional and the symbolic in a way.
Nice. So we wanted to ask as well, just as Eliza said in the beginning, one of the reasons we love your practice, your and Jorge's practice, is that you're always building upon and revisiting the works. So why was refuge wear and nexus architecture so important to revisit over the span of 10 to 15 years, from the early 90s to the 2000s?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's part of a research practice. Refuge wear 91 to about 95, and then this you know, seminal encounter with the philosopher Paul Virilio, who talked about the collective, and then thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, you can see the transition there in those images. You have the individual dome, and it transitioned into the dome with the arms and the leg appendages coming out of it. So, okay, I'm taking that single individual, but I'm thinking more about the collective, and then in that is the poetics of, you know, living together, the difficulties of that, the difficulties of communication. I mean, I hope that I'm evoking that in the work, obviously. And then on the bottom there, the different refuge wear prototypes, and then it takes time to develop those, and then confronting those with the general public, and getting feedback from the general public and audiences, and then bringing that back into the process. So all of that happens over a number of years, and none of these are, you know, manufactured. It's not a commercial practice. You know, these are experimental. So it's, you know, it also, if you talk about the practicalities of working as an artist, it takes a long time also to generate funding or find sponsorship or partnerships in order to have that going on. But, you know, in order to progress forward and develop the work. And then, you know, thanks to wonderful commissions, the one on the right there is in the midst of things, a commission for an exhibition to create this village where it's bringing communities together to interact with the architectural structure. So, you know, and I guess it is this research practice where I'm exploring these notions of, you know, mobility and interconnection, and each time learning from the experience of presenting it to the public and taking that forward. And then some things that, you know, I think it's absolutely wonderful to test different mediums and disciplines. So we work a lot with musicians, we work a lot with contemporary dance. So the image on the top there is with dancers. So all of those are part of an experimental process that, you know, think, oh, great, you know, this has happened. And, you know, the feedback that I've got from that leads on to something else. And then, you know, I want to express something new with the work in body architecture, which is different from refuge wear, and likewise nexus architecture is different too. Here in the nexus architecture, originally it was a linear configuration, and then thinking about the complexity of our connections and social structures, we began to think, okay, it's no longer a linear configuration, we'll make this kind of a network, the interweaving of people, and then, you know, figure out this, you know, connection and disconnections as a metaphor of society. And then, you know, through all of these different performances, gaining feedback from people and, you know, taking it forward in other directions.
Nice, it's always constantly evolving and growing. And don't forget everyone else to leave your responses in the chat and any questions you might have for Lucy as we're talking. So I wanted to talk a bit about the refuge wear pieces from East London. So we know you staged a series of interventions to challenge the act of social disappearance. So the pieces we're talking about here are photographs of East London, estates and local areas. So in an interview, you explained that peripheral urban spaces such as squats, railway stations, bridges and subways were chosen as areas for simultaneous happenings. So we wanted to know, what did you mean by simultaneous happenings?
For example, you're making me go back to when I was creating it, going back to the past here, and they did happen simultaneously. I mean, we moved from one location to another. The performance took place in different locations within 1 day or 2 days. Simultaneously is, I guess, is a way of saying that they're happening, that performance happens, and they come together as a single piece. Through these multiplications of the happenings. So yeah, and here these are some of the images that you've just mentioned in Paris and in New York, actually. And the work isn't complete until we bring them together. You know, these different confrontations are coming, are drawn together.
I suppose they also come alive as well with these sort of interventions. When you see them worn versus kind of seeing them not worn, there's a big difference. And yeah, I just wanted to ask as well, we've got a question in chat from Mohammed. Does the responsibility of the issue of sustainability and climate fall more to first world countries? How does this balance manifest within those societies?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat that again?
Sure. So, does the responsibility of the issue of sustainability and climate fall more on first world countries? How does this balance manifest within those societies?
We have a saying in our studio, which is 1 + 1 = millions. And so the responsibility is each individual in whatever capacity they can. So, you know, not to put the blame on anybody in particular. Obviously, you know, we are, as developed countries, of course, major polluters. But I guess what we try to promote is the capacity for individuals to make change, and for those individuals to become part of a larger whole. And that is the motor forward.
Thanks for that, Lucy. There's also a question in the chat from Susie saying, thank you for speaking about your work. Could you talk about whether you see the function of your work as sculpture or as items ideally or as items, ideally to be used functionally? Sorry.
No, they're all sculpture. That's very clear, but it's very particular to our practice that there's this very fine line between the functionality, between the symbolic content and its functionality, and that's very deliberate. I mean, these domes here, you can see, we'll talk about Antarctica, I think, a little bit later on, but you know, they're domes, but you can't actually sleep in them. They're not designed in a way, they don't protect from the elements, and obviously in Antarctica they wouldn't withstand the extreme conditions under long periods of time. What's more important here is the symbolic nature of them being on that continent. In the case of refuge wear, they are prototypes, and they're tested in a way to see if they can function, but they're not designed, they're not manufactured in a way that they can be used every day. And yeah, to talk about that deliberate choice, I mean, there's a personal perspective, and then there's also the studio perspective. The personal perspective is me coming from a design background and wanting to, being really frustrated with the fashion industry and not having, at the time there was no outlet, there wasn't sustainable fashion or ethical fashion that that has become so prevalent today. So I didn't want to fall into the trap as a designer. How to explain this? I began making these prototypes, and then companies approaching me to manufacture them, but they weren't manufacturing them for humanitarian reasons. They were manufacturing them to insert them into a range, into their brand. And at the time, I wanted to distance myself from marketing and branding and commercialization and product development. So that was a very personal decision. And that's why I decided to dedicate myself exclusively to this as a research practice. Then from I guess the theoretical side of our practice, this notion of operational aesthetics, we're very interested in art that is on the fringes, not on the fringes, I guess on the borderline between functional and the symbolic, that having that capacity to become functional is really important, because it allows others, it allows audiences, it allows any person to imagine that it's possible. So giving this the hope and the possibility of the work becoming, not my work in particular, but other people's work, other designers, other everyday projects that we work on, that can be taken over, I guess, how do I say that, co-opted in a way and become somebody else's. So it's really important that there's this transmission, and we call this catalyst, operational aesthetics, a trigger for others to, you know, take up ideas. And it was really to go back to education. This was one of the reasons that I founded the first sustainable design program. I was invited to found it, to head it, together with a team, a pedagogic team. The first program was at the Design Academy in Eindhoven in Holland, because I saw the need at that time. You know, I kind of abandoned design, abandoned the possibility of these products becoming, these sculptures becoming commercial. But I saw that more and more students, more and more young people were needed an education where it was possible to make sustainable in the social sense and in the environmental sense design, and have it functioning and operating within society.
And then a question from us. So your works are always responding to real life events such as homelessness, as you said, or like the French farmers protest or scarcity of water. How much research goes into starting one of these projects?
Just look at Antarctica here. What does it say? 1995, and then we're actually able to realize it in 2007. So a long time. Not when we're not working on it full time, but the grain was planted in 1995. Jorge represented Argentina at the Venice Biennale. He didn't have a pavilion at the time because Argentina didn't have one. So instead he created an ephemeral work and wrote a manifest. This is in 1995, and presented the manifest in a publication as part of his work for the Biennale. So, you know, and then through that time, you know, that has been like a seed that's planted. It starts to grow and ramify, and parts come in. Fertilizer, you know, specialists, scientists, ecologists, curators, until it actually comes into fruition. And I guess the actual physical manifestation of that was in 2007 when we went to Antarctica. And again, thanks to the collaboration with the End of the World Biennial, which took place in Argentina, and the curators of the biennial. So yeah, a long research process. On the one hand, the theoretical aspect to it, maybe the scientific aspect if it's an environmental project, and the practical research that needs to go into, you know, developing a project like the Antarctic project.
So we'll come back to talk more in detail about the Antarctica project. For now, we're going to spend the next 8 minutes watching one of Lucy and Jorge's projects exploring food and agriculture, called 70 by 7 The Meal. This was a project made in Philadelphia in 2013. So there should be a link up in the chat right now for you guys to click on. The time's around, it's 5:44. Let's come back at 5:52. Yeah, let's come back at 5:52, guys. So we'll give you some time to watch the video.
So that was such an interesting video, and it looked like a lot of work. Lucy, how did you manage to pull off such an ambitious project, and what was kind of the story behind it?
Oh, sorry, I missed the first part of the question. It was
how did you pull off such an ambitious project?
Antarctica?
No, the project we just watched, so 70 by 70.
Oh. Yeah, where to start? It was the project. I mean, the project had been written about, as I mentioned, in 1995. So we had the parameters of it, the structure of it, the idea, the concept for it, and Jorge met the curators from the End of the World Biennial. They're Argentinian curators, and the biennial was to take place in Ushuaia in southern Argentina. And Ushuaia is the air base for Argentinians and also other scientists to travel to Antarctica. So, of course, that made it evident that we were so close to Antarctica, we couldn't not use this opportunity to ask the curators if we could present the Antarctica project as part of our representation in the biennial. And if we couldn't go to Antarctica and found the first community, which would be the symbolic installation of the tents on the continent. And then once we get there, maybe I'll just share the screen and you can see the images of, yeah, the scientists there. So I don't know how to go back. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so those are the images that we presented to the curators of the End of the World Biennial. Are those on the top there, Photoshop renders. And then when they accepted the project, you know, based on everything that we proposed them, I went about making the tents. And then we were physically able to travel to Antarctica during the spring in 2007. There's a short window of time where it's possible to travel to Antarctica so late in the season, where it becomes too cold and too dangerous. The temperatures are too extreme, going down to -40 degrees. So it was, you know, just a really, really short possible time in order for us to realize this project. And then when we arrived in Antarctica, the team arrived in Antarctica, the scientists didn't know that we were coming with an artistic project, and they were a little confused and didn't really understand what was going on and what we were proposing. And so one of the things that we prepared in advance were the football shirts here, and you can see the Argentinian scientists playing football in Antarctica at the Marambio Scientific Base. I mean, what better way to involve people, and specifically Argentinians, in a project by creating a football match. But the specificity of the match is that the football shirts have different colors, front and back, different countries. And so you never know who you're playing for or who you're playing with. And so it's breaking down this notion of, competition. It's about collaboration and cooperation. And so, having prepared that prior to Jorge and the team going, we knew that we get confronted with some difficulties, even if we managed to get there. But, preparing an artistic act, an artistic performance like this football match was a way of, excuse the pun, but breaking the ice. I mean, we're also drawing from historical events, because Shackleton, one of the explorers, the famous Antarctic explorers, also played football on the ice. And so, we're drawing from elements that from history, but also, in cultural differences and interests and artistic ways, performative ways to collaborate with people. And then you can see there on the bottom the images, how difficult it is to move around Antarctica. You can see some of the extreme architecture, the architecture for extreme conditions, helicopters that need to be deployed to go to various parts of Antarctica, and then, working, with special gear. So it is a very difficult and complex project to realize, and it wouldn't have been possible were it not for the support of the biennial, first of all, the artistic biennial, and then the scientific community at the Marambio Argentine base.
I think we'll come back to Antarctica in a few minutes, but there's a question.
Oh, sorry, you wanted me to talk about food.
Yeah, it's fine.
The food project. Oh God, would need another 2 hours. But basically, it's the same. It's the same. Working with amazing curators to realize these kind of projects. I mean, I mentioned Antarctica, but it's the same method and the same energy and the same passion on behalf of organizations, cultural organizations, to want to support these kinds of endeavors. In Philadelphia, it was the Mural Arts Organization, and traditionally they support artists to realize murals on buildings, skyscrapers across the city of Philadelphia. And it was the first time that they'd organized a meal on such a scale. There were 900 people sitting in the Thomas Paine Plaza that you saw there, and then community meals taking place across the city of Philadelphia. And it was the sheer passion and tenacity and dynamics of the curators that enabled that project to take place. And also the belief that, these kinds of gatherings, these kinds of projects like Antarctica, like 70 by 70 meal are possible, and it's a way of bringing communities together. So there's all of that passion and dynamics that enable this. We can't do it on our own. We can do it as a community, and we can do it with everybody involved, from the professionals that are there to help the logistics to the people that are there and working in Antarctica or eating at the table around the meal. It happens because we're operating on a collective scale.
So Myra's asked, how did you come up with the menu in Philadelphia, and did you try to incorporate like Philadelphian culture or influence within the menu?
The menu, we try wherever possible to collaborate with chefs. And in this case, the chef was Mark Vitry, a Philadelphia-based chef who is very well known for his menus based on locally sourced food, organic food. And then in order to scale up, because a chef, has a restaurant, but, he can cater for, 200 people, but to scale it up to, 900, 1,000 people, we worked with a traiteur, how do you say that? A catering company in order to scale it up. So based on the menu that Mark gave us, then the catering company scaled it up. It was, we wanted to make sure that all of the produce was sourced locally and that many local farmers were also participating in the meals. And then in order to, gather the community around that, all kinds of, food tasting, food growing, conferences, discussions, learning, gaining knowledge, learning about organic food, and also not only organic food that's in danger of disappearing because of species loss, so the preservation of seeds in order to keep certain species alive and available to the farmers in order to be able to plant them, etc. All kinds of activities and initiatives were happening parallel to that, thanks to the collaboration. So yeah, wherever possible, a chef is involved in that, and yeah.
So we know, Lucy, that your interest in food and agriculture was motivated by the French farmers' protests in 1996 against European free market legislation. So that inspired projects like All in One Basket, Horti Recycling, and eventually 75 the Meal. So we thought that this draws parallels to the farmers' protests today in India. So in India, thousands of farmers are protesting against new agricultural laws that will essentially destroy their livelihoods by giving private corporations more control over the sector. In a nationwide strike that's been ongoing since the end of 2020, the farmers have blocked and camped out on major highways to fight for repeal of these laws. So similar again to French farmers who dump their harvests onto the highways to protest their laws. So we wanted to ask, what do you think needs to change in society in the value we place on final product as opposed to labour and our awareness of food practices?
I mean, specifically, that provoked us to work on food waste, and that became one of the key focuses of the project for a number of years. In the beginning was that using that situation where all of the harvest was dumped onto the highway to also highlight waste in our cities. And at the time, we specifically collected waste in the markets to focus on a local problem. But then, of course, this was in the mid-90s. This was before it was possible, before any legislation was made in order to be able to collect waste from supermarkets or from restaurants or from catering companies. So what's important, I guess, in how this project unfolded was that, over a number of years that we kept tackling the issue of waste and then working together with organizations and not-for-profits, activists, in order to make these kinds of issues visible. And eventually then, was it a couple of years ago, then legislation was passed that enabled the issue of some waste, specifically in France I'm talking about, to be collected and redistributed. So have I answered the question? What was it?
I suppose it was more about, well, you did answer it, but it was about sort of how we place emphasis on final product, the food in front of us, and we sort of forget the story behind it in terms of labour. Again, if we think about what's going on today, like with the Indian farmers and versus back then, it seems to be still an ongoing issue.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, those are huge questions to answer. Of course, I mean, it's not only food, is it? We're detached from many things. We're detached from our natural environment because we're not enough in the environment. So these are much larger issues that need to be tackled. Is how do we reconnect to the food chain? How do we reconnect to our natural environment? I don't know whether I have the answers for any of that, but the kinds of works that we're doing are about, and the reasons that we're doing it is because we want to connect people back to these these origins in a way, in all kinds of different ways, and art can be a means to do that, as a democratic form of bringing people together and confronting, I guess, politicians confronting the issue head on, but in a way that's poetic and allows the audiences and other people to apprehend the problem and maybe take on board, get closer to, in some cases, to the environment in projects that we're setting up. So I guess, yeah, we use all kinds of formats and tools and methods to try and bring people closer to these issues. Definitely, the food on the table, yeah, we're disconnected from that. But as artists, we try as much as possible for that to be a theme or concept of the meals that we undertake.
Exactly. Do you think, though, from the 90s to now, our relationship with food has changed? Because right now, food and agriculture is something that's spoken about a lot, that we all have different food beliefs and practices. So have you seen a change over the years in our attitudes to food?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, definitely, yeah. In the same way that that I mentioned earlier, that there are now ethical designers and sustainable fashion, and we as a general public, we as citizens can start to ask for change and demand that, and demand industry and politicians to make those changes.
Surrounding your kind of projects with food, what are the responses that you usually get from the general public? Like, do they understand what your projects are about, or do you kind of have to explain a bit more?
I mean, specifically the food project is, we call it an invisible artwork because it takes the form of the daily rituals. So you're part of it. So we're not even questioning whether it's art or not art. But yes, to go back to that question, it is tricky for some audiences to go to a museum or to have contact with, interact with contemporary art. So we firmly believe in setting up structures, in setting up projects, in providing tools and methods for the general public to get closer to creativity, the act of creating something, and specifically in the case of the meal, creating it together, creating this collective body. So how we do that differently from maybe a community meal is that we provide elements that are part of our daily lives, like the dinner sets. I don't know whether that was shown in the video, but we make for each of our meals, we've made over 40, we've staged over 40 meals, and we have now over 70 different Limoges plates. I don't know whether that was shown in the video, but each of the guests was given a Limoges plate, and on those Limoges plates were enameled food species that are in danger of disappearing from the food cycle, unless we preserve them, unless their memory is preserved through sharing, through seed sharing, and through the dissemination of recipes for those food, and through planting and growing, obviously. So in a way, the 900 people sitting at that table have taken away a part of that artwork, and have that in their home to reflect on it beyond the meal that's taken place, in the same way that the tablecloths are printed too with elements. So these kind of layers that we're building up within a structure that already exists, the eating together already exists, but in a way we're opening that up with all of these elements that are introduced to it to provide new insights and new ways of thinking about the food cycle, the food system, food, what we eat, what's put on our table, etc. But that's one of it, and then it's accompanied with all kinds of workshops and things. That's the culmination of 18 months working together.
So kind of coming back to the Antarctica project, as someone who's part of the older generation, what do you think of the impact of climate change on the younger generation?
It's to say that we're leaving this. A lot of people say that we're leaving this problem for you, but that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. And so, yeah, the issue is so complex, and and can be very overwhelming. So how to go about, you as young people, working on it. I mean, I mean, all that we can say is that we need to communicate as much as possible, and we try to do that as much as possible in the kinds of projects that we're staging. I mean, you have to tell me it's so important for you, isn't it? So
yeah, it's very important to us.
And we as the older generation have to do as much as we can to not let that become your problem.
Thank you. I'm going to pass over to Sarah now to introduce the studio tour.
Yes, so this is the part we've all been waiting for, to see around your studio, Lucy. So we know you have 2 studios, one here in Paris, which you're calling from,
oh, sorry.
one in the countryside, Les Moulins. So before you show...
Sarah, are you there? We lost you for a minute.
Oh, okay, sorry guys, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got to the part where you said she's got 2 studios in France.
Okay, so we just, well, I wanted Lucy to speak a little bit about Les Moulins, or maybe show an image as well, so for everyone to get a sense of it.
Yes, I'm in the Paris studio at the moment. This is in the basement of our home, and we're in the process of setting it up, so I'll take you around that afterwards, but I'll just share my screen and show Les Moulins. Let's figure out where that is on the slideshow. Yeah, there's lots of Antarctica I was going to show you in the passport project, and that's fine. Food. Oh, I think it's right at the beginning. Hold on. It's easier for me to talk with slides, but this is a bit cumbersome. Sorry about that. Okay, can you see? Yep. Yeah, so the image here shows the beautiful valley of the Grand Morin. The Grand Morin is a river that feeds into the Marne, which joins with the Seine. And we moved out of Paris. We moved our studio out of Paris in the year 2000, not to this particular location that's here in the image, but along the river, because the valley was so beautiful and so inspiring for our practice, and then the potential that the buildings offered along the valley in order for us to enlarge our practice, to allow other things to take place within the practice. And so we say that we founded Le Studio de Moulins as an extension of our practice to create an environment where creativity and collaboration and different competencies can come together in a kind of a community in a village. Just to show you a little bit how it works, it's a complex that we founded. So you can see the map of Paris, and Les Moulins is east. It's just over 30 miles east of Paris, an hour's drive. And there's the river, and along the river, these different factories. The laiterie is the dairy, the Moulin de Vacherie is a small mill, the Moulin de Boissy is a pulp mill, and then the Moulin Sainte-Marie is a paper factory. So it's the birthplace of the paper industry in France. And this heritage, the history, and the potentiality of the building, the architecture, the landscape was really a motive and very inspiring for us to create this project. So we began acquiring the factories and then finding partners to help build this project, so that the dairy now today is a design gallery, contemporary design gallery. The Moulin de Vacherie is artist residences. The Moulin de Boissy is now exhibitions, and there's a gallery continua there. And the Moulin Sainte-Marie is now a place where different artists are located. Our studios are there. There's exhibition venues and sculpture park, all this kind of thing. So, our practice it goes beyond just our studio. It's reaching out into the community and transforming community. And this is the Moulin de Boissy. And so we came across this mill in 2008, and we brought in the partner, the Gallery Continua, to take it over, so that now they host exhibitions, international exhibitions. And the idea was that we would have a community of contemporary art actors, those that make art like ourselves, research art, perform it, but also show it, exhibit it and present it. So this is why one of the reasons for having a gallery on board. And then this is the Moulin Sainte-Marie. This is in 2009. We moved here. So we moved all of our studio, the painting studio, photography studio, performances, etc. here. These are showing the buildings when they're empty, but they're filled now, absolutely filled with things. But just to, the scale of it is just inspiring, and in a way that we could create and build these partnerships in order for the project to take off and become a community, which it now is today. And then since the beginning, we ran masterclasses and workshops and hosted residencies and exhibitions and events. And now my son, who's a young artist, has formed the Total Collective, and he's in charge of exhibitions and projects that take place beyond our actual studio practice. So that's La Total Collective, and you can look at it on Instagram. So yeah, it's as well as being a site for creating, it's also a site for sharing and inspiring others to create as well. So I guess that's why we say it's an extension of our practice. Oh, that's
amazing. It's massive. We saw it online before when we were researching you. We were like, this place is massive. Like, massive, it must be so amazing.
Yeah, we're not on our own. There are other artists there now, and there are 2 openings a year. So the gallery are open all year round, but we open our studios. The artists open their studios twice a year, and the next one will be on the 13th of June. And then after that will be in September. So it's usually the summer in June and in September where it's possible to come and see the exhibitions and the projects that have been taking place and actually visit our studios too, for real.
That would be the dream if we could all visit. So I guess now...
Absolutely love you to come.
Oh, amazing. So we'd love to see your studio you're in now. If you could show us around, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to turn my camera around. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, let's hope this works. Okay, well, yeah, behind me, there's a wall. So what you're seeing there are, these are works in progress. They're part of the Amazonia project that we didn't talk about today. Here, so these are the tables where we're stitching things, and over here, all of these flowers that are being made for the Amazonia project. In the background, you can see an island project. It's just a small studio for stitching things. Oh, I can show you the Antarctica tents that I was talking about earlier on. This is maybe interesting for you. The tents have been, they suffered a lot in the extreme conditions in Antarctica. So we're taking them apart and repairing them. It's what's called conditioning. So every single glove and every single flag has to be taken off the original tent, washed, cleaned, restitched back on, and then stitched back again. So hence our collaborators are helping us with that at the moment. So that's Antarctica. There's all kinds of pieces in progress here, textile pieces. I'm not sure that my internet connection is going to work any longer, but oh, and then we have the machinery. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, those are the sewing machines. One of the tent pieces is waiting to be sewn. So, and then this is part drawing studio, and I have another drawing studio upstairs where I'm preparing the drawings for, oops, where are they? There they are, masks And then fabric, there's lots of fabric around, lots of bits and pieces on the table that we use in the work, and then back out again. So yeah, that's the studio there, going back into the studio.
So how many people do you have working in this studio? Because you know Le Milan is the large one. It's more of a huge collaborative effort. In this space, is it just yourself and Jorge?
Yeah, we have we operate a practice which is based on the seasons, because the factory, the paper mill, the Moulin Sainte-Marie that you saw, the Moulin is huge, and to be sustainable, we don't heat it in the winter, and it's very costly. And so we have smaller studios that we work in, and that's me and Jorge in the winter time, and we conceptualize all the projects and do the drawings. And then from the spring, we have a team depending on the projects that we're working on. And so in Paris, there's Monsieur Aubry and an assistant and 2 interns coming. And in the Moulin, it's the same as well, but it can go up, the projects, the team can grow according to the different projects. But we're coming out of lockdown, as everybody knows. We're kind of like waking up now, the studio's opening up, and hopefully, you know, things will start picking up and we'll be less on our own and have more people around us.
I suppose that leads to Maya's question in the chat. So she's asked, how has your studio work been affected by COVID? Would you say that the pace has gone slower because it's just the 2 of you, or?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, it's different for you in the UK, but in Europe, there have been windows where we've been able to carry on with production. And fortunately, we have the studios in the country that we can go out to, and we have all the materials that we need in order to produce. And in fact, having this concentrated time in our studios without the obligations of, you know, the exhibition openings and things like that, it's actually more conducive for us as artists to have that focused time to work. So we actually did more production, more conceptualization than we've done in previous years. So it was very productive. In terms of, you know, working with subcontractors and things like that, it's been a little bit more complicated, but even so, you know, we adapt our practice depending on what's possible. So I think we talked about this a little bit earlier on, you know, being flexible and adaptable as much as possible according to the seasons and according to the spaces that we're working in, etc.
We wanted to ask, kind of coming back to Antarctica again, do you think that the ideas of political neutrality and scientific preservation in Antarctica should be expanded to other parts of the world?
Oh, that's the premise of the Antarctica project, the Antarctica World Passport project, based on the Antarctic Peace Treaty and these common values of cooperation and world peace. Yeah, we still firmly believe that, and we've developed a set of values that you can sign up to in order to become a member of our Antarctica World Community and receive a passport there's a picture of that for the audience if they haven't seen it. Let's have a look. Here we go. Oh, I don't know what I've done. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing. Am I sharing my screen?
Try again, Lucy. I think you must have pressed the draw. There we go. Got it.
Yeah. Here it is. Yeah. So to become a world citizen, yeah, 30. Actually checked, there were 32,400 citizens, over 32,000 on joining the community. And you can see the world map, the distribution of the community around the world. So yeah, sorry, to go back to the question.
So what kind of things do you have to like agree to get one of these passports?
So act in favour of sustainable development through simple daily acts. That's going back to, was it Mohammed that you asked the question, 1 + 1 = 1 million? So through these simple 1 + 1, we can all act together in favour of sustainable development. defend natural environments under threat as a global public resource. And those can be not just the environments like Antarctica, but our local environments. So locally, what can we do in order to, you know, plant trees or make sure that there are wildlife species for bees, for pollination, this kind of thing. And then fight against climate change generated by human activity. I haven't given you the answers to that specifically, but you know, make sure that, you know, single-use, that we're not single-use plastic and things like this. These kind of daily simple acts that we can do to reduce our imprint, carbon footprint on the planet. We can all be more resourceful in many ways and support humanitarian actions aiding displaced persons in the world. And specifically, the Antarctica project we've been working together with the Nanshan Initiative and the Program for Displaced Persons. We've been at the Migration Week in Marrakesh and at the COP Climate Summit and at the Nanshan Initiative Global Consultation on Migration for Displaced Persons in the world, particularly related to climate migration that will increase as climate change increases.
Could we see some more images of the Passport project?
And oh yeah, the other one was share values and peace for future generations. So by obtaining a passport, it's also a way to transmit these values to other people. Let's see. This is at the Migration Week, the UN Migration Week in Marrakesh, and we printed 2,000 copies of the passport. And it's a closed meeting for representatives of, for example, the ambassador of Fiji there, the foreign secretary of Bangladesh was there to draw up the first compact on migration, so an international agreement on migration. Specifically, what's happening today in terms of migration is that climate migrants are not recognized as refugees. So considering the rights of those that will be displaced in the future because of climate change. And the mayor of Lampedusa there is also receiving a passport. Here at the COP21 in Paris, so the important climate agreement. These are images also from Freeze London, where we distributed 5,000 passports in London and 15,000 passports during the COP summit to engage people in the issues and to bring this community together, the Antarctica World Community. And yeah, this is the distribution process going on, and you can see pictures of the passport, and citizens applying for a passport are registered on the database, so that in the future there will be a possibility for us to come together and act on a global scale. This is the Nanshan Initiative in Geneva with the Swiss ambassador and who else is there? Yeah, the Secretary of Norway, Interior Minister of Ghana, the Interior Minister for Iraq. And here the officials are drawing up the framework for migration, which is induced by climate change. And we subsequently learnt after that everybody, I think there were 250 officials that joined this consultation. All the 250 all received a passport, and the Interior Minister of Iraq incorporated one of our passport messages into his proposition for international migration.
Very quickly before we finish, sorry.
Yeah,
Maya has asked, do you ever feel that you lose a sense of ownership over your work when working on big collaborative projects? If so, how do you deal with this? And is this necessarily a bad thing?
I don't think it's about ownership, first of all. This is, yeah, I mean, where we stand on this is that the work should be a trigger for others to take on board. So if it is taken over, I guess then it's successful in a way. Yeah, and if the sleeping bags or the tents, you know, do become useful for whatever humanitarian reasons, then it's not about ownership. It means that the artistic project has been successful in a way, and this is what operational aesthetics is. What, you know, what we consider that to be is that it has had that success and it's been taken on board by a larger society, by citizens at large.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lucy. That was amazing.